Let's continue with part 2 on conducting a literature review. Let me briefly run through the steps needed to do this. And the steps are: select a topic, locate relevant literature, analyze the literature, synthesize the literature, and then write the literature review. Of course, we also need to remember that the writing process involves a process of drafting, editing, and rewriting. Now, these steps are described extensively in your course textbook. One of the strengths of the textbook is that it provides you with everything in a step-by-step manner. And it also provides you with lots of guidelines and principles for each of these steps. So let's take a look at the first step: select a topic. What are some of the guidelines? Well, first of all, you need to select an area or a topic which is of interest to you. And this should be something which is relevant to your ministry context. Remember, you can use this assignment to begin thinking about what you want to do for your capstone project. However, we'll cover more about the capstone project in the second residency, so don't be too overwhelmed with focusing on a capstone topic. Next, Galvin recommends that you do some preliminary research on the topic. And this means doing a library search and getting familiar with the subject area. You need to do this to help narrow down the topic if it's too broad. This will enable you to fit the topic into the length of your literature review. And likewise, you need to expand your topic if you find that it's too narrow. And you do this to be sure that there is sufficient material for you to conduct your literature review on. Here are some elements to help you narrow down or to expand your topic. You can ask yourself what time period you wish to examine, whether it's this century, the last century, which decade, or even the future. What population is under investigation? Is it by age or gender or ethnicity, or maybe it's the location, which country the research is taking place in? What perspective is the research on? Maybe it's from an economic angle or the social, cultural, spiritual perspective. So let me give you an example. Now let's say I'm interested in a topic on online learning. Now, this is really a very broad topic. So I do some preliminary research in the library, and then I decide to narrow it down to spiritual formation in online learning. And after doing more preliminary research, I settled on spiritual formation strategies in online learning. Now, I could have chosen to deal with the topic in a very different way. For example, maybe I'm not interested in spiritual formation. Instead, I'm interested in learning effectiveness. So I could narrow down the topic to learning effectiveness in online instruction. And if I still find my topic too broad, I can narrow it down to learning effectiveness in online theological instruction. However, that's likely too narrow a topic and yet be a struggle to find sufficient material for review. The next step is to locate relevant literature. Now, in your Galvin textbook, you'll find this step included together with a chapter on selecting a topic. In your search, you ought to aim to find primary resources of empirical research. And this is the work reported by the researcher who actually conducted the study. This is preferred to secondary sources. And secondary resources, they really just report what other researchers have done. When examining primary research, take note of the details of the empirical study. What was the nature of the research? Was it exploratory or explanatory? What was the research question or the hypothesis which was being tested? What is the population under study? What's the sample size? How was the sample obtained? What variables are under study? What instruments were used to measure these variables? And here we are referring to survey instruments. What relationships were found between the variables, and what conclusions were then drawn? Now, you'll be completing a library search exercise in this course, and this will guide you to search both the TCA as well as the LPC electronic databases for journal articles and ebooks. You will also be using Google Scholar to find possible resources, and it'll also be a good idea to search for dissertations on your selected topic. Focus your search on peer-reviewed journal articles. You should also start by examining the most recently published articles and then work your way backwards in time. Read the abstract of the articles to figure out if the article is relevant and useful. And you can also examine the bibliography of the articles or the books, as this will point you toward other relevant material. The next step is to analyze the literature. Now, the Galvin textbook has provided extensive guidelines. Let me mention some of my own. Firstly, scan the articles to get an overview of each one. You start by reading the abstract, the introduction, and then the conclusion of the articles. This will give you the gist of the research conducted. Make notes as you read and use a consistent format for your notes. You might wish to use a table with columns documenting details like the research question, the research methodology, the results and findings, and important remarks. Now, you should also record down any other significant details. If you find a notable quote which you might want to use, record down the page number so that you can cite it later. Now, you also need to identify key terms and theories. Consider creating a table of terms and their explicit definitions and who defined it that way. You could also create a summary table of key theories. This should include where the theory originated from. Be sure to record down all these definitions and theories and their sources so that you can cite it in your paper. Then you need to organize the articles, organize the books, your notes into groups of related subtopics or themes. This guideline is much more useful if you're writing a longer literature review with, say, 20 or more resources, and it's less necessary for shorter papers. Still, the intent is to start organizing the material, organizing even your notes. This will help you structure your literature review around the themes that you found. Now, your textbook also provides chapters which specifically addresses analyzing qualitative and quantitative studies. You should utilize these chapters as relevant to your work. The next step is to synthesize the literature. After analysis and organizing, you proceed to do this. First of all, consider how to assemble your notes. You have amassed a large number of notes up to this point. You now need to figure out how to relate the notes to one another. How do the separate findings fit together? Note especially points of agreement and disagreement found in your notes. Second guideline is to create an outline for the literature review, and this will then form the skeleton of your paper later. A third guideline, to follow the subtopics and the themes that you have discovered. You might need to arrange and rearrange your material several times during this stage. A fourth guideline is to highlight weaknesses and gaps in the current state of research. Now, you might realize that there are weaknesses, say, in the methods that are used or the arguments that are put forward, or you might realize that there are gaps in the literature, and this presents opportunities for further research. The last step is to write the literature review. Now, there are a number of chapters in your textbook devoted to the process of writing the review, and these guidelines are very, very comprehensive. The whole process, once again, it revolves around writing, editing, and rewriting. Some of the more important guidelines that I can offer: first of all, use the appropriate tone and voice. Note that you're writing an academic paper, so you need to adopt a formal academic tone. This is not an informal piece of work, so please avoid any use of slang or colloquialisms. You should also be writing in the third person, using third person language and not first person language. Secondly, summarize your sources. Learn to summarize the content and use a variety of verbs in your writing. Instead of constantly just using author A says this, author B says this, use verbs like acknowledges, admits, contends, concludes, explains, expresses, and on and on. And I've given you several verbs here which you can utilize. This adds variety to your language and expression. A next guideline is to limit the use of quotations. Now, some students have a tendency to fill their entire paper with tons of direct quotations, especially block quotes. This should be avoided. Most of the time, you should be just summarizing what the authors are saying in your own words. Avoid plagiarism. Give credit where credit is due. And one of the ways to avoid plagiarism is to make good notes so that you always keep track of where you took your important points from. Also, when writing your paper, try to use only your notes. It's helpful to avoid going back to the original document. And this ensures that you express the thoughts in your own words and in your own style. Write the introduction at the end. Now, many students try and write the introduction right at the beginning. The challenge with this is that you don't even know how your final paper will look like. So it makes sense to have only a brief skeleton for your introduction and then only really work on it after you've completed the body of the paper. Check the APA style manual. Now make sure that you have followed the APA style. Refer to it whenever you are uncertain. I hope you found this video useful. I wish you success in conducting the literature review, and I hope you find it to be a great learning experience.